Caught Dad with a 16-year-old. I was 15 when it happened, though I didn't learn the full truth until years later. At the time, my family had taken in my two friends, sisters, and their mother while they were going through a difficult divorce. It was an odd arrangement. But back then I was mostly excited because I saw it as one long sleepover with people I loved. The younger sister was 14, the older one 16, and I was 15. We lived in what appeared to be a normal family home. My father, on the surface, was seen as a strong personality who provided for us. My mother was more passive, usually deferring to him. Underneath that, though, was a constant undercurrent of tension. My father had an unpredictable temper, a knack for control, and a tendency to make everyone walk on eggshells. My mother, in contrast, was often the peacemaker, fiercely loyal to him, but also quick to smooth over any cracks in our family's facade. One weekend I stayed overnight at another friend's house, leaving our home for just about 24 hours. When I came back, everything had changed. My two friends and their mother were gone, kicked out abruptly. I remember asking my mother, "What happened?" She gave me an explanation that felt jarring and incomplete. According to her, the 16-year-old had tried to make a move on your dad. My mother claimed she'd walked in on some inappropriate behavior, but put all the blame on the teenage girl. She portrayed the girl as manipulative, a homewrecker in training who'd taken advantage of my dad's kindness. My mother's anger was intense and laser-focused. She painted the 16-year-old as a seductress, insisting my father was the victim. At 15, I didn't have the context to challenge that narrative. Still, something about it seemed off. I knew this friend. She was shy, often sad about her parents' divorce, and not the kind of person to brazenly chase grown men. But my mother was so certain, so furious, and I was too young to question her. And so, I accepted the story, more out of fear and confusion than genuine belief. The years rolled on. Occasionally, the memory of that abrupt eviction nagged at me. Even as a teenager, I sensed that the explanation felt lopsided. Why would my friend risk so much? Her home, her reputation, to seduce my father. And why did my mother handle it by blaming the girl, rather than confronting him or calling the police? Yet at the time I lived under their roof, financially and emotionally dependent on them. My father had a way of casting a shadow so large that questioning him seemed impossible. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I mustered the courage to look deeper. The uneasy feeling never left, and I realized I needed closure. So, I tracked down my old friend, the one who'd been 16 at the time. We'd lost touch after she left our home, but social media made it possible to reconnect. I messaged her, apologized for the awkwardness, and asked if she'd be willing to talk about what really happened. We met in a casual setting, a small cafe. My heart pounded as I waited for her to arrive. Would she even want to revisit something so traumatic? But she did, and though she was guarded, she agreed to tell me everything. As soon as she started talking, I could see how much it had affected her. Her eyes welled with tears, of anger, sadness, or maybe relief at finally being heard. She revealed that my father had essentially groomed her over time. One night, while my mother was upstairs, pregnant with my younger sister, my father and my friend had been drinking together on our property. He encouraged it, or at least allowed it. Then they went skinny dipping, which felt more like his idea than hers, as she described. Under normal circumstances, you'd expect an adult to refuse or discourage such behavior, especially with a minor. But that's not what happened. She said he was affectionate and caring, making her feel special and wanted. She was 16, going through the emotional fallout of her own family's divorce, and was confused and vulnerable. He exploited that vulnerability. After the skinny dipping, they ended up inside the house, possibly near my parents' bedroom, where things became sexual. That's the moment my mother walked in and discovered them. Enraged, she immediately blamed the girl, ordered her and her family to leave, and concocted the story that this teenager had made advances on my father. Hearing my friend's account left me shaking. I pictured my mother, pregnant and presumably more tired or resting, stumbling onto a scene with her husband and a 16-year-old. The obvious reaction should have been horror, calls to the police, or at least some immediate separation from my father. Instead, she turned all her anger toward the girl, silenced the situation, and never publicly acknowledged what my father had done. That's when the betrayal hit me. Not only was my father someone meant to protect children, preying on a teenage girl, but my mother was actively covering it up. The next day, she slandered that girl's name to me, to neighbors, and likely to family or friends who asked why our house guests left so abruptly. She was pregnant, yes, But that doesn't justify turning a minor into a scapegoat to shield her husband. I returned home after that meeting feeling nauseous, furious, and deeply sad. I was in my 20s by then, out of their house, more independent, but still carrying the emotional residue of my upbringing. I'd always known my father was controlling and my mother was enabling, but I'd never realized the full extent. This was no longer about petty family conflicts or emotional manipulation. This was about grooming, statutory sexual abuse, and a family's calculated cover-up. For years I sat on this secret. Partly, I wanted to respect my friend's wish to move on. She told me she spent years in therapy dealing with the trauma. She'd eventually chosen to let it go legally and not press charges. She felt it would drag her back into a nightmare. She was also convinced that no one would believe her, given how effectively my mother had painted her as the villain. I told her, "If you ever change your mind, I'll back you up." She appreciated it, but was adamant she just wanted to live her life without this overshadowing everything. Years later, I became a mother myself. That experience is what truly catapulted me back into this hidden family chapter. Holding my newborn daughter, I kept thinking, what if someone did that to her? What if my husband was caught with a minor in our home while I was pregnant too? The thought ignited a protective rage in me so fierce that I finally understood how parents can move mountains for their children's sake. But that only deepened my resentment toward my mother for covering it up. Even if she'd felt trapped or scared, how could she expel a child from our house and keep living with a man who had preyed on a 16-year-old? The moral betrayal felt staggering. The forgive and forget dilemma. In the back of my mind, I sometimes ask, could it have been a one-time mistake? Is it somehow forgivable if he never did it again? My answer is always no. A single act of violating a teenager's trust and body is enough to show who he really is. Moreover, my father's personality, narcissistic, short-tempered, controlling, hasn't changed in the intervening years. He still believes he can do no wrong, and my mother still stands by him, defending or explaining away his behavior. That leaves me wondering if he had more victims or if the damage he caused went beyond this one incident. A secret like that, once successfully covered up, can embolden a person to repeat the pattern. To this day, I don't know if that's happened, but the very possibility haunts me. I see him around nieces, nephews, and I can't help feeling uneasy. I've never witnessed anything suspicious, but the knowledge alone keeps me on edge. For a long time, I contemplated exposing the truth to the entire family. I imagined confronting my father publicly or sending out messages to aunts, uncles, cousins. But each time, I remembered how this family deals with conflict, denial, rewriting events, turning siblings against whoever steps out of line. If I told everyone what really happened, would they believe me? My father would likely become enraged, deny everything, and my mother would back him up. My siblings might buy their story. I could be painted as a liar or someone out for attention, maybe even banished from family gatherings. Beyond the fear of being ostracized, I also think about the girl's wishes. She worked hard to move on. What right do I have to drag her back into it? If she wanted justice, I would stand shoulder to shoulder with her. But she clearly stated she doesn't want that battle. So, I stay silent, torn between moral outrage and a desire to respect her decision. This unresolved tension leaves me feeling complicit, even though I never asked for this secret. Now, in my 30s, each time I see my father, I'm reminded of that night. Every holiday, every family event, there's a piece of me that wants to scream, "I know what you did," but I don't. I've learned from a young age that challenging him leads to emotional chaos. My mother has demonstrated she'll do anything to protect his image. The rage I feel, especially since becoming a mother, is intense. It's as though I have to bite my tongue to avoid lashing out. Part of me wishes I had the courage to cut them out of my life completely, but family ties and the fear of losing my siblings hold me back. That makes me question how many other people in this world carry similar burdens. So many secrets go unspoken because the cost of telling the truth is terrifying. People fear they won't be believed, or that family bonds will shatter, or that they'll face legal repercussions. Meanwhile, survivors of abuse are left feeling betrayed and unheard.